So next up we have John, who will be talking about measuring the return of investment in digital healthcare interventions.
I think I am. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to use the mic, I guess. Do you want this one? Sure. How's everyone doing today? I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to make it up. I think that telemedicine is fascinating. And I just want to riff on that because I think that is so integral to things like efficiency and functionality and outcomes. And I challenge the group that it's not about innovation. It's not about innovation. It's about implementation. Because it's all here. It's all here. I'm going to reach into my pocket and take out my EKG machine. And this is not a joke. I carry around an EKG machine in my wallet. Now, it might be for atrial fibrillation. It might be for hyperkalemia. There may be instances relative to transplant. But a lot of these tools are here today. So I also find it very interesting to ask patients, or even ask doctors, how do you like it? Right? How good is telemedicine? Are you happy with the level of care you're receiving? And there's an interesting component to that because Henry Ford said, if I asked my customer what they want, anybody know the answer to this? Henry Ford said, if I asked my customers what they want, they'd say a faster horse. And I wonder, do patients and do clinicians in that same context understand what's available? So I'm happy with a certain dynamic because I'm ignorant of the options, not because I'm satisfied with the process. And I think that's part of the efficiency. When we talk about efficiency and cost effectiveness and stuff like that, it's born out of ignorance in some ways. So for me, as I kind of watch this whole world of technology and efficiency and optimizing care, I kind of keep that in the back of my mind. There's another point that's interesting. I'm going to channel my Steve Jobs today because I'm wearing a black T-shirt, so you got to do at least one Steve Jobs quote, right? Steve Jobs said that the early days of television was nothing but radio with a TV camera. Think about that. The early days of television, basically they did the same show, the same radio show, except they put a camera in front of it. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Pardon my back. I want to make sure that I'm looking at everybody. You know what that is today? A TV show, a radio show with a TV camera? It's called telemedicine. Telemedicine, in many instances, is about a Zoom call with a doc. It's what my mother did in 1965 when I had otitis media. She called the doc and said, John has an earache again. The doctor said, okay, does it hurt? Yeah. Does he have fever? Blah, blah, blah. I'll call it a script. That's the same dynamic. So I want to talk a little bit about technology and that kind of stuff today. And again, questions, answers, pushbacks, I think that's the nature of our discussion today. Because my fundamental proposition to this whole thing, and I started on my talk at the first day, and I hope some of you got a chance to hear it, is that we're shifting to this cognitive era. That we're shifting to this notion of thought. We're moving from the mechanical advantage to digitization into cognition. And how do you put value on that? How do you put a measure of value? How do you quantify the speed of thought? And how do we measure cognition? Because that is where we're going today. And I want to just talk conceptually about what I think is going to change. And the first thing I want to talk about is this idea of the bell curve. We use the bell curve all the time. We use it in data, a normal Gaussian distribution. We do it in all our published papers. We also do it as a time management function in clinical practice, right? We know, you saw that little clock up on top of that image? That's a blessing and a curse, right? Because that defines my sort of utility and domain as a clinician. What's going to happen is the bell curve is going to become squished. And it's also going to shift. And there's a lot of interesting data about this. So the efficiency of procedures across clinical practices when optimized through technology will actually get tighter. So instead of having a wide bell curve, we're going to have a more narrow bell curve, and that bell curve is going to shift in one direction or another. My argument, it shifts in the direction of being smarter and better. And so that's the first area that I think is interesting. And that bell curve is going to give us the opportunity to kind of have a new sort of cognitive efficiency, if that makes any sense. And how many people here have used ChatGPT? I usually use it so a lot of people have used it, right? This modality can help us increase thinking. It could create some data I'm going to cite here that I just looked up. Within 15 minutes, you can generate 200 ideas. This is a creative dynamic. So 200 ideas. And remember, medicine, as much of it as a functional art, and medicine is a humanistic thing, it's a compassionate thing. Medicine is creative. We are often challenged to use creativity in clinical practice, supported by available options and also data. So the ability to craft more options and to think creatively is where I see it's going. It improves by a factor of 40 times more iteration or options. And for me, in the context of medicine, what do we think about? We think about differential diagnosis, we think of options. The mistakes that often occur in clinical practice are a function of that one phrase, and we've said it many, many times. There's even a product in the United States called V8. Anybody got that in England? It's a juice. It's a tomato juice, V8. Anybody ever have a V8? The commercial was, I wish I forgot, right? I should have had a V8. Well, that's that cognitive process. It helps us think. It helps us create a palette for human curation. So by developing options, it changes the game fundamentally. Now, the interesting thing about the efficiency of this process is the unique combinations. In other words, it creates things that are within our sort of cognitive domain, but it creates other combinations. And maybe there's a unique combination by the number of steps you take, your creatinine clearance, and the different your pulse pressure, your systolic and diastolic. We don't know that. It's putting together these things, and it's mixing those combinations that I think technology will push us into a much more efficient domain. Now, what does that mean in terms of application? I find it very interesting that when we talk about things like telemedicine and technological advances and the future and optimizing care, we're looking at modalities that are sort of yesterday in many instances. You know, it's that implementation phase. It's the adoption sequence. So when it comes to sort of ChatGPT and these technologies, they're extraordinarily new. Anybody hear of ChatGPT prior to maybe January or earlier? These modalities really kind of came into purview in an extraordinarily rapid way. And that in medicine is both good and bad. That flips everybody out because it's here and I don't know how to manage it. So how do I know if something is efficient or effective when we've only been using it for 6 months in many instances? And I think what I find really interesting about this, and I'm going to riff on your slides a little bit, is that it creates a new type of efficiency. And that type of efficiency I refer to as sort of the GPT, if we want to use GPT, triad. Because there are 3 domains that seem to be evolving here. The first, and this is a study done with business people, business writing, so we have to extrapolate this to medicine. But they found that leveraging technology in the context of GPT, efficiency went up 40%. Now, let's not argue the 40. Let's just say it's a big number. It's a real number. So people became more efficient. Accuracy went up, I think, 19 or 20%. A very, very kind of funny thing. We had a long talk about accuracy the other day, and I think accuracy is still a bit in flux. But the output of these technological things were accurate. But the third one is really interesting to me, and this goes to this whole idea of physician burnout and physician fatigue. And we know that many physicians today will not tell their children to be doctors. even though our good friend Shafi, who spoke yesterday, both his son and daughter are in medical school now. But we find that physician burnout, particularly in the United States where I live, we hear a lot about that. What this study found, and I think it extrapolates to medicine, is that using this technology, users had a greater sense of personal satisfaction. So think about that for a minute. What does that even mean? If I could use a technology that is iterative, so I engage in a technology that not only thinks, I use that word in quotes, thinks with me, a technology that creates a cognitive partner that has access to a very, very rich and very, very deep database. By the way, that's what we do all the time. We go on, we look something up on Wikipedia. But this is doing it for us. So by having that cognitive partner and having this nature of iteration, the iterative dialogue, I spoke about that the other day a little bit, that is a very, very efficient construct where I can speak with a search engine, if you want to call it a search engine. It gives me an answer, and then I ask it another question based upon that answer. So how do I make guacamole? Boom, I get the recipe. But then I say to it, I take out the cilantro because I think it tastes like soap. Give me other options and make it spicy. But you know what? Tell me what the most popular recipe in Mexico is. So it's an iterative thing, and I think we can do that in clinical care too. Just last week, there was a woman who had a child with a rare disease. This is in the U.S. papers. It was on television. The child had seen 17 doctors over the course of 3 years and failed to be diagnosed. I don't want to demean medicine because I think this is so atypical and not consistent with the quality of care that many patients receive. But when you look at patients who have clinical conditions, especially rare diseases, their clinical path is long, right? Their clinical path is difficult. And it often takes years and years of back and forth to find the right treatment, to find the right diagnosis. Let's not even get to treatment. Well, this mom used ChatGPT. She typed in all the words. She typed in all the findings from the MRI, painstakingly typed in the words so that the GPT would have a powerful prompt. And the big story was that it came up with a solution. It came up with a diagnosis that was actually correct. This is a very difficult concept to talk about because it's a little bit of showbiz, But the fact that this kid could not sit, as she puts it, crisscross applesauce, was a very interesting finding that GPT layered into this discussion, this prompt, and there was some association with a spina bifida condition that wasn't diagnosed, and things surprisingly evolved to a good spot. My talk topic was supposed to be on sort of outcomes and efficiency. To me, that was a very efficient outcome. And how did it come to be? It came to be in the context of the quintessential patient empowerment. Right? That's the buzz phrase in my world is consumer centricity or patient centricity. Actually, consumer centricity came from the Apples of the world and the Microsofts and the Amazons. And clinical medicine and pharma adopted that phrase of patient centricity. In fact, that's wrong. It's technology-centric medicine that most of us will be practicing in the future that is patient-infused. But what happened was that we found this efficiency where the mom, leveraging technology, found a startling revelation that she could share with her doctors. So to me, what I think is coming out of technology, particularly the GPT modalities today, is efficiency and accuracy, but a sense of personal satisfaction. Because I now have the ability to work with a genius. Anybody here see the movie Rain Man? Right? Rain Man? It was a pretty interesting movie, right? Rain Man was a real man. He was a savant. He had extraordinarily high cognitive function across certain areas. And what we're beginning to see is the emergence of these LLM, large language models, that work with you as your Rain Man to emerge this new, very, very interesting level of efficiency. Now, I talk a lot about iteration. I talk about the internal monologue becoming the internal dialogue, where you sit in front of your computer and you have a chat with it. Maybe it's more like a dress rehearsal in some instances, where I can discuss with technology the best way I want to handle a difficult discussion with a patient who has maybe a bad prognosis, or a patient who has a good prognosis but a problematic spouse or child who's in inhibition to care. It's this kind of dialogue that helps us become more efficient, more effective. And I think that's where the world is moving today. But the nature of having that genius in your pocket, and we already do, right? It's your smartphone. But having that ability to connect with a Rain Man is becoming more and more and more and more and more personal. That's where I think the efficiencies of technology and medicine and LLMs are going. People here know about Bloomberg, the news service, right? You watch it on television. Some people have Bloomberg terminals in their house. What Bloomberg has actually done is taken the corpus LLM, the base model of a large language corpus, and taken all their data and put it on top of it. And they've created a private Bloomberg GPT. Think about that. Think about your medical center, your hospital, your unit, your transplant unit. Take that data, combine it with an existing corpus, an LLM. Now, here's the interesting thing. It lives on the computer. It lives on your computer. It doesn't go to the cloud. Interesting thing about Microsoft and some of these big companies, they like you to be in the cloud because that's where they make their money. But the new models will live on your computer. They're small enough and they're efficient by design so that I will have Rain Man on my computer. And I'll be able to interrogate Rain Man or interrogate this LLM with your clinical data, your financial data if you want to do it. I'm talking about you personally, so that I can interrogate the system and come up with options. So it's not just the mom who has a son who's been to 17 doctors over 3 years where we can't find a diagnosis. It's a transplant unit looking to save costs without sacrificing jobs, and having it create a multimodal interpretation of this thing. And those are the other two parts that I want to go over just real quickly, is that we're now seeing the data come at us from a multimodal source. So we're looking at visual data, videos, text, speech. Think about this. The language translation was done by AI at this meeting. So those of you who needed live language translation, there were no translators in little booths talking. It was just done by computer, by technology. Think about the application of that type of linguistic processing in telemedicine. How optimized would it be if we could take that telephone or video discussion, take it, digitize the words, and do a sophisticated linguistic analysis, by the way, the technology is already here, and look at the words, the word choice, the number of times the patient might have said transplant or pain or some sort of red flag word that we can tag, and use that to do sophisticated linguistic analysis of a telemedicine visit. We're moving away from the domain of Steve Jobs and the radio show. So the multimodal emergence of this technology is what I think is going to be a very, very powerful tool. And the fact that it's your LLM. To me, that becomes extraordinarily powerful, and the opportunities are boundless. So does that make sense? I'm looking for some heads nodding, not the usual suspects. This is stepping out of a comfort zone, right? That's the nature of innovation here. I think that in many instances, particularly in clinical medicine, innovation sort of is a difficult path forward. And what was our first innovation? Anybody want to take a guess? Our first technology? I would argue it's fire. Fire, right? I think that's a pretty good. Someone said water the other day. I said, isn't it interesting, like water and fire, that kind of, there's sort of dualities in a way? So I would argue that it's fire, right? Fire as I talked the other day, fire is real interesting because it let us stay up at night, it let us migrate, it let us heat our houses, it let us cook food, to eat protein, to grow our brains. That had real important aspects of human evolution and transformation. It also, could become a bomb. I could burn my enemy's house down. It was a weapon. And technology today and yesterday has an intrinsic duality of wonder and fear. And that's where we are today. I think we are right in that sweet spot of wonder and fear. And the bigger the innovation, the bigger the wonder and fear. It's correspondingly. Interestingly, it doesn't go away. 1917, airplane lands in your wheat field. The guy steps out of the airplane, takes his goggles off, and says, "You want to go for a ride?" Right? Everybody thinks that's the coolest thing I ever saw, a flying machine. But I'm not getting in it. That's where we are today. Driverless car. Any of you who have ever had the opportunity to go in a full self-driving experience in like a Tesla, please do it. Just try it. Try it as an experiment in transformation. I'm from the States. I was in Shafi's car, his Tesla, and the wheel is on, the steering wheel is on the other side of the car, which like confuses me anyway. So I'm sitting on the driver's side of the car, and that gave me an experience of not being in control. Wonder and fear. Exactly, wonder and fear. Technology is at the same spot, particularly AI, and probably GPT, because GPT is so accessible. I could talk to you about CRISPR and really advanced 6, 7 Tesla MRI machines, and it just goes over your head. It's so complicated. But for the average person, the average clinician, the ability to sit in front of your smartphone and look at GPT and engage in this, it is your full self-driving. It's full self-driving in a cognitive capacity. Here's the takeaway. What is the leading cause of personal property damage in the world today? In Greece, it might change because of climate issues, so I'm not sure the answer. But around the world, it's fire. Right? The leading cause of destruction is fire. We haven't made the risk go away. The risk of fire is still there. My kids love a campfire. My son Jack just can't wait to pick up that burning stick and kind of run after his sister with it. Right? They love it. But it's wonder and fear. That's where we are. It's wonder and fear. It hasn't changed. And that's, I think, where the path is now, that with technology, we have to understand that it's not just going to go away. We're not just going to click a box. We're always going to have to live with it in some contextual way. We've learned to manage fire. We insure against it in interesting ways. So maybe technology has another layer, a buffer zone, that somehow gets between you and it to try to mitigate in some way that duality of wonder and fear. So I think that in the final analysis, what we're seeing is technology will allow you to discover your inner genius. And I'm not using that as a trite expression. I believe it to be actually factual. We know that the genius experience, and I know I'm getting way off topic here, but I'm just going to wrap it up on this one. We know that the genius experience is not a fixed reality. When we think of genius, it's not a smart man sitting in a room with the answer all the time. In fact, the genius experience is a punctuated experience. We look at Albert Einstein in the year 1905. Right? For the rest of his years, he spent time in Princeton, not doing a heck of a lot. But we look at Newton, who was confined due to a pandemic and invented calculus. So introspection, contemplation, and this heightened level of personal experience, called the genius experience, is accessible to us all. Sometimes you've had it personally by that aha moment. It's in a clinical construct where you're like, I got it. That's what's going on here. It's that aha moment. That's the genius experience. And that genius experience is a function of iteration. It's a function of thought. And that's what GPT and technology is going to help clinicians do. And I think not only is it efficient, which is important and critical, not only is it smart and accurate, but it's going to empower us. It's going to have a dimension of self-realization that I think is truly transformative, not only for humans, not only for the human spirit, for humanity as a whole. So I'm going to stop there before I really go off the deep end. Thank you all.